Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I am Brian David, Managing Director of the Lloyd Group, an East Coast-based IT services, cybersecurity, and risk management firm. Today's webinar, I think, is going to cover two very important topics. We've broken them down into two very specific buckets. First one is related to cyber insurance trends in the market today, and that'll be presented by Doug Kreitzberg. Doug has been a phenomenal business partner of the Lloyd Group and our clients. He is also the founder and CEO of SeedPod Cyber, a cyber insurance managing general agency firm that Doug founded back in 2021. We're then going to pivot over to essentials with regards to cybersecurity and risk management as it pertains to helping you prepare for cyber insurance due diligence. That'll be presented by Bill.goldin, our Director of Security and Risk Management at Lloyd. I've had the pleasure of working with Bill now for over 15 years. He's a tremendous asset to Lloyd and our clients, and is a regular speaker on cyber and risk trends in the IT managed services industry. A couple of quick housekeeping items. This slide deck always ends up being a question that's asked at the end of webinars, is whether or not the slide deck will be made available. We will send this out to to everyone, all attendees after the webinar today. And then with regards to questions, obviously there's, I think we've left plenty of time based on the presentation and sort of our role play and kind of run through for questions at the end. So we ask that you either hold those questions to the end or you can submit those via the chat. We'll have people that are on the side that'll be gathering all the questions throughout the presentation. And as we get towards the end and get to the Q&A, we'll start bringing those out for us to review and for Bill and Doug to hopefully be able to answer your questions. We are recording this presentation just as an FYI. I think with that, Doug, I think we're good to kick off.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate the intro and certainly appreciate the partnership. As Brian mentioned, I run SeedPod Cyber. We're a cyber insurance managing general agency, and basically what that means is that we have created underwriting processes and strategies for a custom insurance programs that we provide to clients of managed service providers, such as clients of the Lloyd Group. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on just defining what cyber insurance is. Some of you may be well versed in it. Some of you may be wondering, whether you should consider buying it for yourself. I'll give that at a very high level. I'll talk about the trends going on and why those trends are occurring in cyber insurance today. Talk a little bit about how you should approach the renewal of the policy if you happen to have a policy already, or applying for a policy for the first time here. So, but to begin with, just from a base level, cyber insurance protects you, and we're really talking about businesses, your organization, from a compromise of your system that is typically based due to some type of malicious or accidental action here. And so an example could be a data breach. Your system, a bad guy gets into your system and is able to expose data and take data, sell it or use it for whatever reasons. You may have heard some of that in the press over the past few years. A bad guy could hold your system ransom. You may have heard of the term ransomware, in which your system is basically encrypted and you're prevented from accessing your system unless you pay the bad guys ransomware. It could also be from the standpoint of someone who misrepresents you. If you happen to be the CEO, sends an email to your a controller saying, I'm in a meeting, I need $50,000 to close this deal. and you go ahead and wire the $50,000 only to find out that that wasn't your CEO, it was someone pretending to be a CEO. So those are examples of incidents that may give rise to a claim. And there are basically two types of claims. One are claims that are what are called third-party claims. That's when someone sues you. So as an example, in the data breach situation, if an individual felt that they were hurt by the fact that their data was exposed, they could sue you. So that's one aspect of what cyber insurance would cover. The other is what are called first-party costs. These are costs that you have to pay. And really over time, that's been the majority of the claims that have occurred, because a cyber attack on you creates costs in the form of hiring forensics to understand what happened, to restoring the systems back to the state in which they were, or recreating data. And even in the case of certain situations, to cover your lost profits or extra expense that occurs while you're unable to access your system. A ransomware attack, as an example, on average, takes a business down for about 26 days. So that could be 26 days in which you're unable to perform business. You're losing revenue, you're losing profits, and that's another area in which cyber insurance may be playing a role here. A few years ago, and it was only up until about a few years ago, cyber insurance was relatively inexpensive and it was relatively easy to get. All you really needed to have was the name of your company, website, revenues, perhaps whether or not you had a firewall, and you were able to get a premium quote and coverage. Things have changed since then, and in a real dramatic way. And if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of explain why. Really, the biggest change, the biggest driver in the change in cyber insurance has been from ransomware. Data breaches were always around, and ransomware had been around for quite some time as well. But it really began to expand dramatically around 2018. And you can see during COVID and working from home that it began growing even more. And what you're looking at here is really almost an illustration of the growth of ransomware. If I overlaid a graph of the ransomware, it would almost be the same as that red line. What these bars represent are insurance premiums year by year, and the red line represents loss ratio. And the loss ratio is basically the percentage of claims divided by the percentage of premium. So as the loss ratio goes up, that squeezes the carrier in terms of its profitability. And the loss ratios really exploded from 18 to 20, driven largely by ransomware. There's a 300% increase in claims. And then the carriers decided to do something about it. And what they did is what carriers typically do is they raised rates in dramatic fashion, almost doubling the rates. You can see there was a 92% increase in premiums in 1 year. Now that's across the board. And that did have an impact on loss ratio. It did go down slightly, you see that, but not to the extent that the claims continued to rise. And basically what that means is that we are still in an environment, and in the foreseeable future, we'll be in an environment where, the bad guys are going to be out there getting into our systems, creating damage, creating financial hardships to businesses. And we're not just talking, the Targets and the Home Depots of the world. The median-sized organization that's been hit by ransomware has been hovering around 150 employees. So we're talking, small, medium-sized businesses here who perhaps could not sustain, being down for a month, or sustain the type of costs that are required to be in business. And from a carrier standpoint, carriers do a few things. I mentioned raising rates, and that's one. If we go to the next slide, talk about a few others. They, in addition to raising rates, they may lower limits. So you may have had $3 million in limits last renewal. This renewal, they may say, hey, we're only going to write $1 million. Or you may have had 10 million if you were a larger company, $10 million in limits, and they say, no, we're only going to write 5 million. They're trying to lower their exposure there. And some carriers decide they're going to exit. Some have exited cyber altogether, saying this isn't worth the headache and the hassle. We can't figure it out. And some have just chosen to exit certain types of market categories. So it could be high-risk industries such as healthcare, financial services, or areas in which they've seen, large claims activity. The other thing that they've done, and if you go to the next slide, is they're paying more attention to actually what they're writing. I mentioned before, 4 years ago or so, you answered a few questions on an application. Now the applications are multiple pages long, and they may have supplements to them, and they're asking a lot of technical questions. And these are things that are catching some insurance brokers by surprise, and certainly catching businesses by surprise. And then, of course, they go and they ask organizations like the Lloyd Group to help them out. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what are the carriers looking at. We'll get into the technical controls, but there's a few other things too that you should be aware of. If we go to the next slide. And these are the factors, and there's a few others certainly, but these are kind of the key factors that make up how a carrier thinks about a business with regards to cyber insurance from a rating standpoint. They want to see a business. They look at the business stability, and the biggest marker to that is how long you've been in business. So the longer you've been in business, the more comfortable that they're going to be with the risk. The types and volumes of data you have. If you have a lot of healthcare related data, that's more risk because it's very valuable if you're a bad guy to get a handle on that. If you have obviously financial transactions, that's going to be more risky. If you're dealing with a lot of businesses and you're not really holding any critical information with regards to the business, that's a better risk from their standpoint. Governance, how is the organization viewing cyber risk? Do they have a cybersecurity policy? Do they have an individual either on board or that works on their behalf that's overseeing the security? That's important. The industry is very important as well. And I mentioned healthcare and financial services, typically on the riskier side of the aisle. Retail could be as well. But that's another component. Revenue size is also a big determinant, and typically the revenue size is where the rating begins from a carrier standpoint. So they use that as a proxy. The more revenues you have, the bigger the base rate will be in which the ultimate premium is calculated. And then the technical controls. And just if we go to we'll go to that in a moment, but the technical controls are the reasons why your applications have gone from a page or two to 9 to 20 pages. And they're questions that are trying to answer or find out what you actually have within your environment relating to cybersecurity, and are you doing the right things? All these areas, when you look at an application, can feel daunting, and in fact they can be, and the questions can be tough to really determine what they're asking because it's not always in English. There may be a lot of insurance speak or even cybersecurity speak. The important thing is, though, when you're doing an application, is that you answer them as accurately as you can. And and if you have questions about any item on the application, you can go back to your broker or the carrier to ask. What you don't want to do is misrepresent that something does exist, and when it really does not, in fact, exist. And if we go to the next slide, there's one example, and this is an example that really occurred just a few months ago, where an insured had stated that they had multi-factor authentication over their sensitive data and sensitive assets, when in fact they only had multi-factor authentication on one type of asset, which was the firewall. And the insurance carrier, Travelers in this case, decided when presented with a ransomware claim by this client that they were going to rescind the policy, which doesn't even mean they're not just saying we're not going to honor this claim because of this. They're going to say, if we would have known what you actually had, we wouldn't have even issued the policy in the first place. So you really need to be careful how you're answering these, and just be honest. It's okay to add more to the questions, and certainly you're going to want to talk to your IT department and or the organizations that are managing your IT for you. And just from the standpoint, if I go to the next slide, just want to hit on some of the basics, and Bill is going to go into much more detail on this, so I won't spend a lot of time on these, but these are some of the things that you should have within your environment to make, to ensure that you will be insurable from an underwriting standpoint. Multi-factor authentication, I mentioned that. That is critical. That's probably one of the larger items that the carriers are looking for. It can provide one of the best defenses for a number of situations here. So that's certainly key. Having a backup solution, ransomware I mentioned. The one way to get without paying the bad guys is being able to restore your system. Well, you can't restore your system if you don't have a backup, and you should be testing it on an ongoing basis. So that's critical. The firewalls I mentioned, that's a way that you can block people from entering into your environment or control who has access. Having more of a next generation antivirus solution, email filtering solutions, something called EDR, or endpoint detection and response, which is a way to kind of identify kind of anomalous behavior in your systems and prevent it, hopefully, from spreading outside of it. Encryption, making sure that even if someone gets a hold into your systems, that they can't read it without having the right way to access it. Security awareness training and phishing simulations. Various studies show that the majority of the ways that bad guys get access to the system is through phishing or the human risk element there. So that's certainly critical. And having an incident response plan, a good solid one that you're testing on an ongoing basis. Even you can have everything set up correctly, but the bad guys still may find a way in. So being able to manage what happens after you are aware of that is something that is critical. So that's kind of the components there. And I'm going to flip it over to Bill, and he'll go into more detail with regards to what's really critical from a cybersecurity standpoint to have an effective risk management program. Bill?
Thanks, Doug. So next, what we're going to talk about is kind of like the top 5. So we're going to talk about it. We can go for a long time. Doug mentioned a lot of things, but I just wanted to talk about the top 5 that we're seeing essential for cyber insurance. Next slide. So the first thing I wanted to start off with is the written information security policy. So one of the questions that we get is, do you have one? So why do they ask that? If you have an information security policy, it kind of shows a different level of maturity. Management knows that security is a priority, that you've taken the time to actually document what your security policies are. You're probably reviewing it on an ongoing basis. So they want to make sure that, hey, do you have it? When was the last time reviewed? Was it updated? Making sure management approves it. And the last part of it is, does everyone in the company know about it? Has it been signed off? So it's great if you have a policy, but if you don't share it and people aren't aware of it, it doesn't make sense. So, and when we're talking about information security policies, there's 3 key things that everything we do or put in there should fall into. And this is called the CIA triad for security. So it's confidentiality, availability, and integrity. So everything we do in security has to fit in one of those 3 buckets. All right, next slide. So emails, Doug mentioned phishing attacks coming in. This is probably the biggest attack vector we're seeing. So most likely on your questionnaires, they're, like Doug said, they're getting stronger and they're looking at the details. They're asking, do you have something that scans for malicious links and attachments? Are you tagging external emails? So if you get an email, is it tagged saying, hey, this is from outside, so this is help from spoofing? So you know, if you get an email from the CEO, but it has this weird banner that says, hey, it's from the external, you'll know it's an easy kind of marker for the end user to know that, hey, this is not a legitimate email. Next, SPF, DKIM, DMARC. These are all things Doug mentioned. These are all security protocols. So at a very high level, SPF is basically telling you, hey, these are my known senders. So if you're using a Mimecast or Proofpoint, Office 365, you can set up a list and saying, hey, these are the ones that can send emails. DKIM is basically encrypting each message and putting like a digital signature on it. So you're saying, hey, I sent this message, here's my signature. And if it matches up or if it gets changed, then you know there's something wrong. And DMARC is just kind of the combination of the two. Basically, you could set up policies to say, hey, if an email comes from my domain and it fails either DKIM or SPF, you can tell the receiving server to either quarantine it or reject it. So that's a big thing that's helping on spoofing, is basically it gives it a little more control on your side of who can actually send emails and who's receiving them. Interactive security training. So they want to make sure that you're training your staff and your employees on the latest trends, what to look out for, how to identify a phishing email, what to look for on a website, going through all these trainings. What is ransomware? You want to make sure that your staff is aware and your employees know what are the common security attacks going on. And then phishing email solutions, simulations. So basically you want to test. So if we're doing these trainings, the best thing to do is test. So send these out, send them out on a quarterly, monthly basis, so people can look at them and you can actually see your score go up or down. Hopefully it goes down with the training. So show that these security protocols and these things you're doing are showing effectiveness as the scores go down. So you want to make sure that you have these, and this is a huge section in the applications. All right, next. Identity and access management. So Doug mentioned MFA. So MFA is extremely important, especially for remote access. If you're trying to protect someone from getting in, you want to make sure you have multi-factor authentication. So if you have Office 365, they're giving that away for free, basically. It's part of the solution for Office 365. There's other things like Duo and Okta. Those are all super important. No local admin rights. So making sure that people can't just install things on their machines. This is a question that comes up on almost every single questionnaire. Because if someone does get compromised, let's say it's going to happen, they're going to click on a link, they're going to try to download something, but if they don't have rights to install something, it's going to go a long way in preventing that attacker from moving forward. Privilege access management. So this is who has access to secure passwords. So if you have this, you want to make sure that it's audited, the passwords are changed. You want to make sure that you have something in there that controls your sensitive passwords, because if they get into that, they can get into multiple systems anywhere and move across your environment. And strong password policy. This is the biggest thing going on. It used to be, change your password every 90 days. They moved that to basically don't change your password, but make it really long. They're actually getting rid of the word password. A lot of things are going either password lists or passphrases. So basically you can have a password that's a string of 4 characters, 4 words strung together. So it's longer, it's easier to remember, and you don't have to change it. The longer the password is or passphrase, it's going to be harder for someone just to kind of brute force it and try to guess it. So next. So we talked a lot about the different security products, endpoint protection platform. So we call it EPP. So that's the combination of the next gen antivirus, which is basically getting rid of the signatures and waiting for signatures to download and install. What that is, they're going to the cloud, they're checking them as they come in, every file to get information. Is it known? Is it bad? they'll stop that. And the combination of the EDR, which Doug mentioned, EDR is huge because what it does, it records kind of everything that's happening on a machine. So if you do download a virus or malware, this will actually tell you exactly what files were touched, where it actually went from an IP address, from internal, external, from the network, what it actually did. So if it's set up reg keys or set up files, that's extremely important to know when we're going through an incident response, because we need to know, how did we clean this up? Did we get it all? What did it affect? What files did it encrypt? This will help us really kind of figure out how it happened, what happened, and give us a good, clear response on how to clean up. Another thing they're putting on there is web filtering and DNS protection. So basically blocking sites. So there's known bad sites out there. If we have a list, we can go through it, and someone tries to go through it, we can prevent them from actually going to the site. That's going to be huge, because that'll help with like drive-by malware things. When people downloading things, it's going to block it. Penetration testing. So this is the important thing. We're putting in all these security controls, but are they effective? So they want to see at least a yearly penetration test where you hire a third party to come in, and basically you give them your domain, you give them any external IPs that you have, and they'll do a 2 to 3 day kind of penetration test. They'll scan, look for holes. They'll actually try to get in. They'll test your password policies. They'll test if you have 2FA or not, and they're going to try to get in. And then once they are in, they'll try to move around and let you know. So basically simulate a targeted attack. So this is great. There's either two outcomes when I see these. It's either, hey, they didn't get in, hey, good job, or they got in and, oh man, now we need to protect this thing. So it really is kind of eye-opening in both situations. So next up is vulnerability management. So there's vulnerabilities every day. You're reading the Microsoft releases patches every month, different vendors, firewall vendors, even the two-factor, Duo, Okta, everyone has vulnerabilities. So what we try to do is make sure that you're aware of these vulnerabilities and managing them on an ongoing basis. So it's not like pen testing. They say once a year you're testing these things. This is something you want to do continuously, is test internal and external, so you know where you're vulnerable. So if you have a firewall that's vulnerable for like an SSL VPN, if you know about that, you could patch that before the bad actors can start attacking it. And the longer you don't know about it, you leave it open, you're exposed, the more time it gives it for a bad actor to try to get into it. So next one is the SIM, security information event management. So this is something that's been around for a while, but very helpful when you need it in an incident response. So this is going to grab data from all different sorts. So you can grab firewalls, switches, cloud things like Office 365. You can grab it from your EPP devices. And what this does, it will correlate all that data into one centralized management. So if you have an incident, you can look at the time frames and see when different things are happening, correlate those, and it really helps in the investigation portion of it. And also you can go back, because once you have an incident, most likely they've been in there for a while. And if you don't have all these logs, you can't definitively say when they got in and how they got in and when did this all started. And that's extremely important when going through this, to see where your kind of attack came from and how long they've been in there to really go through it. And the last one is, do you have a 24/7 SOC reviewing alerts? So a lot of small business we deal with, you don't need to have that IT team do it. There's outsourced parties that you can do. But if you have all these systems in place, you have your DNS filtering, you have your antivirus, your endpoint protection, you're blocking all these things, you're sending all those alerts. Someone needs to review those alerts continuously and really escalate. So if you have an outsourced SOC reviewing this, if they find out someone, hey, looks like we have some weird logins from Russia, they can call your IT department, they can take action and do this with it. So you've got to make sure that you have these things in place so you can address these almost close to real time or as quick as possible, because the longer you wait, the more damage that can be done. Backups and resiliency. So Doug talked about this. It's going to happen. It's not if, it's when. So when it does happen, you want to make sure you're prepared. So do you have backups? If you have local infrastructure, do you have them off site? So in case there was ransomware, we've seen it where there's ransomware and then someone encrypts the backup. So their backup system is encrypted. But if you have an air gapped off site backup, you can then restore. Are you backing up your SaaS applications? I don't know if this is one that's coming up more and more, but if Office 365, if something happens, or OneDrive gets encrypted, Microsoft has backups for 30 days. But if something else happened, like you don't have that, there's no offsites, there's no other things. So if you're using a Dropbox or Office 365, you want to make sure you have something to back them up. Are backups immutable? So that's what I just talked about. You have backups, but if your backups get encrypted, they basically do nothing for you. So immutable backups means that once the backups are taken, they cannot be changed, they cannot be edited, and they'll always be there. So when you have a backup system, you want to make sure that they are immutable. So this way you're not in this time period where you get like encrypted backups and then you go to restore and you can't. We talked about a little bit of DR and business continuity. So if you have a DR plan, is it tested? How often are people aware of it? And is it constantly being updated as you change, as people move to the cloud? Everything's in the cloud. What do we have? What if, Office 365 is down? What would you do? So you want to make sure you have these things. And then Doug also talked about incident response. So it's great to have the policy. We got our incident response, but are you testing it? This is going through a tabletop exercise where you're going through a simulated attack, basically, where someone runs it. You have people from different departments. This is not just an IT issue. It's going to be, because if your business is down, you're going to need different people from different sections of your business giving input, figuring out, it's like, all right, well, we can't call our clients because they're all down, or we can't email them. Can you call them? Do you have a backup system? How are you going to let people know what's going on? So you want to make sure that you're going through and testing these policies and your DR plans to make sure that when it does come up, you guys are available and you kind of know what to do, and you're not going kind of frustrated. It's more of muscle memory, saying, all right, we got this. Let's go through the plan. We've done this. Yes, let's call cyber insurance. Let's get them on the line. Let's lock this down. Let's bring up DR. So it's a lot easier than trying to figure it out on the go. If you kind of practice it like anything else, it's a lot better and smoother. So next. So those are basically the top 5 things that I've kind of narrowed it down to. So I guess next we could open up to Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Doug. So a couple questions that came in actually prior to the webinar. And I think, Doug, this is more related towards your field. Question about being applications being cloud-based. Does the company still need cyber insurance, and what type in terms of protection? If the answer is yes. You're on mute, Doug.
So the short answer is yes. Even if you do have and are working exclusively in the cloud, you still should be considering cyber insurance. The data that you're putting into the system is still data that is you're a custodian for from your client's perspective. And if there is some type of action against that compromises your data, even if it's in a third-party system, you can still be liable from a lawsuit protection. And there's still going to be first-party costs that you're going to incur in terms of trying to recreate that data or restore the systems. And hopefully you've done what Bill has indicated, and you've actually backed up those cloud-based and not assuming that just because they're in the cloud, you don't have to back up your data. So there are both the first-party costs that you're still going to incur, and there's still the potential liability that you have in a situation in which even if all your data and all your systems are in the cloud.
Great, thanks, Doug. Bill, one for you. You mentioned recurring, scheduled employee training with regards to phishing and things like that. When onboarding new employees, what would you recommend as a best practice in terms of their training? So, would you recommend that they're in the cycle, whether that's a month out or a few months out, based on what the cycle is at that individual company? or would you recommend immediate training for for that employee when they're onboarding?
Yeah, great question. Basically, you should do it before they even come on board and get access. One of the first things they do, they should look at if you have an information security policy, they should be sending that off so they can read it, understand it, sign off, kind of just like an employee handbook. So a lot of the times we're seeing these kind of combined with the HR training that comes on the beginning. So I would do that. And then also if you're doing security training, awareness training, that should definitely be one of the first things they do as well. So they should be auto enrolled in these things. So if you're a new employee, they should be auto enrolled in those things and then going into the normal schedule for those. So then you can do the phishing and then go back into the annual. But as employees come on board, you should set an annual training program. And if you can do it, you can set it to auto enroll. So any new employee goes through there, it can scan it. You can automate a lot of this stuff. But it should also be a checkbox for the HR and the onboarding team. It's like, hey, has this person got the handbook? Did they sign off on our information security policy? Did they do our security awareness training? Making sure that all those are in there.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Doug, this one's for you. So, I mean, it's kind of a sort of pretty big question. With regards to just in terms of how much, cyber insurance, should someone buy, right? As you're, working through with this scenario with someone, making the best decision and understanding, what makes the most sense for each individual business.
Sure. It is a difficult question to have a one-size-fits-all answer. I'll start on the lower end. The minimums that you should be considering would be $1 million in liability in coverage, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is the average, and this is for small businesses, small medium-sized businesses. The average cost for a ransomware incident is around $256,000 as of last year, based on data from a third party. And the average cost relating to the business interruption, that's the lost profits that would be associated with a ransomware, around $570,000. So you add both those up, and that gets you close to the $1 million. And that doesn't include coverage if someone decides to sue you as a result of the incident. So we usually recommend that as a minimum. And certainly as you are, as the larger you are, the more you're going to want to look at increasing the limits beyond that. And if you're in a healthcare, financial services arena, you're going to want to look at higher limits, even if you're a small organization, because the chances of compromise of that type of data becomes very expensive. It costs about $12 per record to just send out the credit monitoring, those data breach letters that we all get now, and then we put somewhere because we've gotten so many of them. But that's about $12 per record, and so that can get pretty expensive, even if you only have a couple thousand records. So you're going to want to factor that in terms of the evaluation. But you want to work with a good insurance broker or provider who really understands this space and can help you specifically get the right coverage for your needs.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Before I continue reading off, does anybody have any that's attending, any questions? Anybody want to chime in? Great.
I think there's some in the Q&A section. I just saw one come in.
One came in. Yep, we got one from, looks like Adam. I've heard of a few insurance companies requiring companies purchase technologies on their approved vendor list, i.e. Checkpoint for firewalls or CrowdStrike for EDR. Is this commonplace or just unique to specific insurance providers?
I guess I can take that. It is. It's not commonplace at this point. So it would be more unique here. there are going to be, and I would have every business should be prepared to need to indicate what tools are they using for certain types of capabilities, such as firewalls or endpoint detection and response. And there may be a question if what you put down for your solution isn't one that the underwriter is aware of there. But there, to date, the concept of structured panel of providers isn't set. That may be more commonplace down the road. We'll have to see how this type of insurance evolves.
Great, thanks, Doug. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just a little more on that. Just what I'm seeing now is insurance. Like 2 years ago, a year ago, they're like, "Do you have AV?" It was yes or no. Now they're asking, "Do you have EDR?" And then they're giving a drop down. And what my prediction is, they're taking these things, they're gathering that data, and then they're going to base rates on who has the most. If they had this, and they got attacked and they had a claim, they could record those to them. Provide those maybe in the future they do have those approved vendor lists. So but those are definitely, I'm seeing more and more of them actually listing vendors on there than I have in the last 12 months. I've definitely seen that compared to 2 years ago. There were no vendors at all on there. The insurance companies are definitely getting smarter. I think they got hit hard and they're like, hey, we got to take action on this. So the people that are asking questions, the questions are getting, very pinpointed, and now they're even putting in vendors. So.
Great. Adam, were those answers helpful? Any follow-up on your question? Assume silence is acceptance. Moving on to Joe's question. Basically, everyone needs to assume it's just a matter of when something happens versus if. Walking through each of the most likely scenarios and ask yourself, how quickly can I recover from that kind of incident? And what will it cost if I have to pay for help to remediate? So I think we covered some of that during this process. I guess, Joe, is it just, are you more ransomware? Is that just sort of walking through what that would look like if it, by chance you had a ransomware attack, or are there other certain scenarios that you're thinking of as well?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Rather than typing. Yeah, I was just thinking, most clients who haven't gone through an incident just have no clue how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost if they call in for outside help. And so I'm just wondering, is there a way to quantify for the audience, the end user audience, if you have 50 employees, 100 employees, and you have a ransomware incident that takes out all of your machines and all your servers, and maybe you have good backups that we can recover from. Do you guys have like ballpark figures for how much time it takes to recover, these small organizations? Because we obviously, have experience doing it, but it's random, right? It's one day for some of them and 1 week for another one.
Doug, you want to kick off?
Sure. Yeah. Based on statistics, and this comes from an organization called Net Diligence, which works with almost all cyber insurance carriers and gathers data and produces an annual report. For a small, medium-sized organization, the average cost of a ransomware incident is around $250,000, as I mentioned, and the business interruption costs would be around $550,000 or $60,000. So that's what I usually talk to. There's another group that publishes a quarterly report on ransomware statistics that says that the average number of days that an organization is down is around 26 days, and that's been actually pretty consistent over the past several years there, and so those are some information that, should help you in terms of evaluating, what do, at the minimum, what do I really need to have with regards to cyber. And what Bill mentioned, which will help you even more succinctly, is if you actually go through an incident response simulation and you walk through and you get a sense of, we think we can get up in a day, and then you realize that no, it's going to take a little bit longer, and what do you do, and how are you going to respond, and what costs, those simulations can really help you in being prepared in any number of ways, including the financial way.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Bill, anything you want to add?
No, I was going to talk about the simulations and testing your backup. So if you're doing a disaster, you can do a full disaster. Can you bring it up? If you have a cloud solution, how long does that actually take? Going through those and knowing those prior, that'll actually help make some of the business decisions while you're going through those incidents, and get everyone on kind of the same page. Then you have some other people, if we're down X hours, it's going to cost us this much money. And then you can more or less pinpoint it, get a closer estimate for how it is your business, because like you said, every business is different. But if you know how long you can, worst case scenario, how long do you get back up? And you could run through those different scenarios. Basically, what do you think is the most common one, or likelihood of an attack happening to you? If you run through those scenarios and go through the process, you can figure out how many days or hours you'll be down.
Great. Question for both of you. In terms of a cyber insurance policy, how often, Doug, would you recommend that somebody's reviewing their policy on an ongoing basis and updating that policy? And then Bill, for you, just in terms of the written information security policy, same question.
I think with the with your cyber insurance policy, in terms of review, it's a great question. The frequency of review should be certainly at minimum anytime there is some real structural changes in your organization. If you're acquiring a company, or if you're expanding your business, or if you're making changes to your system, or you're bringing third parties on to help you in development of custom applications, those are all should get rise to reviewing your policy. I would say, and at renewal, you should be reviewing your policy to see how it compares with the changes in the types of coverage in the wording. At minimum, I would really ask that you review your policy the first time you get it. We do a lot of policy reviews, and quite frankly, it's scary what people have in terms of policies versus what they think they have, and it still is, as I call it, the Wild West of coverage, in terms that there isn't a standard language. Each policy is different. Each carrier is different, and you really need to be able to understand what it is you're buying, and again, work with someone who can help you through that.
Great. Bill?
Sure. For the information security policy, I would say at least annually, but you should be reviewing it kind of more often, especially if you're going through some security initiatives. So if you're managing risk, and you're going through and you're having quarterly meetings just about security, and you're improving your posture, you want to make sure. So if you're going through and you're like, oh, wow, we don't have MFA, we're adding that, or you're adding conditional access to it, you add DNS filtering, or you're upgrading your endpoint protection platform, you should be updating your policy as you're updating your security posture. Because you want to keep that kind of up to date and making sure it's always aware. Because when you go through those things and going through like a security assessment, you'll probably come out with a list of things. Hey, these are things we're not doing. And you want to prioritize and start creating kind of a security roadmap of where you want to go. Because security is not like a set it and forget it anymore. It's a constantly improving, and new ways are coming out. Things we're talking about today, we weren't talking about, 2 years ago. So you always want to kind of make sure you're on top of it and people are aware, especially management. Usually it's like, hey, IT, and you want to bring it up because of business risks. These new things are coming out, and these security things. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page, aware of the risk to the business. So this way you're constantly kind of improving your security posture.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Doug, staying with the same theme around sort of events and timing of investments, question I think very for you is, will a carrier deny a claim if a question was answered on an application correctly based on the systems in place at that time, but not everything was in place when an incident occurred?
It's a great question, and that's where it becomes a little gray, and the facts are really going to be determinative of how the carrier is going to respond to that. If they can, when they start the forensic work and they do see that all the controls were in place, at a certain period of time, hopefully, presumably around the application, and they can validate that, and then they look to see what gave rise to the incident. If it was the omission of a control that perhaps accidentally was generated or removed, or there was an additional staff member and certain things did not happen, they're going to I can't categorically say in all situations. In most situations, they're going to lean towards offering coverage. If it's viewed that, hey, we had these things in place, and then we fired the MSP and we removed all the systems because we didn't want to spend all that, then the carrier is going to take a much harder view of that. And then there's the kind of the in between, and it really comes to the nature of the incident and what really occurred. But like I said, if it's more on the accidental kind of side, that more often than not they're going to lean towards offering coverage there, because the litigation costs are going to be, perhaps most likely higher for them to try to get out of it.
Great, makes sense. Thanks, Doug. We have a couple more questions in Q&A. We got one from Dave Waldman. Dave, thanks for joining us today. Out of all the backups of SaaS applications, MFAs, et cetera, what is typically required to bind cyber insurance?
If the question is, what do you have to have as minimum in order to get cyber insurance? I'm not sure if that was what the question was, but what we've seen is at minimum you need to have multi-factor authentication in place. You need to have the backups with one offsite, and you should and with data recovery. You should have some type of email filtering system in place, security awareness training in place, and more we're seeing the requirement for that endpoint detection and response there. Those are kind of the, at minimum, that's what the organizations are looking for. I can tell you, if you want to, many more carriers are looking, and it depends on the size of the organization, certainly, as well as the type of industry they're in, will they'll start really requiring, some of those additional controls that we've talked about.
Sure. I mean, saying you have MFA is kind of, unclear. I mean, because MFA can cover one thing, it can cover everything. So I'm not sure exactly to what extent these coverages are needed or looked at. And similarly for offsite backups, like what exactly needs to be backed up offsite if everything is in SaaS. And I know you said SaaS applications need to be backed up, but you'd think that at least some of that onus would be on some of these providers.
Yeah, from the MFA, it's a great question on the MFA, and that's going to be differ from carrier to carrier and what they're looking at. Bill referenced, MFA for all remote access and MFA for privileged accounts on both local and remote. And that's typically what you'll want to see, what the carriers will want to see. And from a backup standpoint, the concept of they're going to want to see that the sensitive data is being backed up. Some argue that if I'm on OneDrive, I'm backed up, but they're going to want to see that there are some ancillary solutions to that. They can still be offsite. The carriers are still okay if they're still cloud-based, as long as they're separate from the original data store.
Thank you, Bill. I'll probably have some questions for you offline.
Sounds good, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. So we got one last question from Adam Ship. Another question. I've talked to a few IT folks that actually got interviewed by underwriters after submitting their questionnaires when applying for cyber insurance. Will this become more common in your opinion?
So,
go ahead, Bill. Do you want to touch on?
Sure. I think as these questionnaires evolve, they went from yes or no questions to multi-part questions with different vendors, and they're going to go through these assessments. I do a lot work with clients where they work with banks and they go through this vendor due diligence questionnaires where there are 180 questions, and then you fill them out, and there's like 3 rounds. They want screenshots, they want evidence. I see this probably, and I don't know, going towards that direction. Doug's nodding his head, so all right, he's agreeing. Where they're going to be because they're basically taking the risk and filling out a form. They want to make sure that you understand the questions, you're answering them truthfully, so they can get on there and they'll actually change your answers. I've done it before where you go through and you're talking about something and they're like, well, you don't really have that, and they'll put a no to that. So yes, they're going to start doing this. I don't know how many are, what the trend is, but I've seen some of it come through, and I think it's going to become more common in the next year or two. So,
and I would, and obviously, like every other business, there's cost trade-offs on doing something like this. So, if you're in a hazardous industry and you're large, you're going to see, if you haven't seen it up to now, you're going to see it a lot more, with it being more of an interview and a back and forth process. Smaller companies in industries that aren't as hazardous or with not a lot of data, it's going to be a different approach and not as hands-on. And certainly, like in every industry, as machine learning, AI, kind of automated ways of getting data and asking questions become more prevalent in insurance as it is in other industries, there'll be those type of tools that will kind of be doing the querying as well.
Great.
Yeah, we're already seeing that with some clients where they're doing external scans and they're scanning their customers on a monthly basis, saying, "Hey, you got this thing, you better cover it up." So they're watching out for you as well.
All right, well, we're at 4 o'clock, so I think it's time to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Bill and Doug for the presentations, very helpful. And thanks to, for all the questions that were submitted. As discussed earlier, we'll send out a follow-up email with a copy of the presentation and, of course, the contact information for Doug and Bill. So if you have any other questions or want to follow up with them on anything that's going on within your business, or additional questions about cyber insurance, security, risk management, certainly reach out to them, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help answer any additional questions. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch.